What's up, everybody? Welcome to Facts on Friday. It is December 24th, Christmas Eve, and we hope you are all well, healthy, staying sane. I'm Jesse Zerwell here with my co host, Misty Winston, and we've got once again a raft of stories to get through, so we'll get to it. And Misty, what have you got first?
Okay, so I wore my fuck censorship shirt just for this occasion because we're dealing with another rash of ridiculous censorship again. So first, we're going to talk about what happened to Primo. So let me pull up his tweet. Okay, so Primo tweeted out earlier, I think it was today. Nope, yesterday. Okay, see, wasn't sure which one was today or yesterday. Okay, so this is the first. YouTube has removed a full episode of my show, which is episode number 252. This seems to be due to the fact that former Congresswoman Cynthia McKinney responded to a patron question asking whether or not there were irregularities in the Georgia vote count during the 2020 election. So this is a journalist doing an interview. He asks a question, which is asked by somebody in his audience to a former Congresswoman, and she answers. And because of her response, they're taking his whole video down, which is insane. This is insane. He's doing a journalism. And because they've decided they don't like the answer, they're taking it down. That's crazy business, right? Okay, so keep in mind, this was not me advocating on behalf of any perspective. In fact, this was not even me asking a question. This was a viewer or a patron asking a former Democratic U.S. Congresswoman for her perspective. Apparently, even that is forbidden now. He appealed, explaining that he's just an interviewer. They denied that. Which again, this is nuts. I mean, this is literally just him asking a question of a former congresswoman, and they've taken his entire video down for whatever reason. I haven't even had a chance to watch it yet, but whatever she said is apparently too much for YouTube. So that's not the only thing that happened. Also, our friends at Hardlens Media. Hi, Kit. I love Kit. So Hardlens also got hit. So it says Hardlands Media got a strike, appealed it, got reinstated. The video is lost, but is on Odyssey. Thank you, Odyssey, by the way. This brings up a question as no one could view our video that fast. The algorithm is clearly going after trigger words. Thank you to the Rockfin. Yes, thank you, Rockfin. And Odyssey team for respecting free speech. So they too had a video. Apparently they got a strike. And they appealed it and they got reinstated, but they still won't put up the video. This is, just more. We're going to keep seeing more of this, more and more and more of this. Hardlands has been messed with a lot recently. I don't know that Primo, I don't remember if Primo's been hit a whole lot, but I mean, Convo Couch, Nico House, The Last American Vagabond, Whitney Webb, everybody, the censorship should trouble everybody, I guess is what I'm trying to say in a very rambling manner.
Yeah, our interview with Nick Hudson from Panda was taken
Yes.
down within 12 hours.
Yeah.
And if I'm not mistaken, Primo's interview with Cynthia McKinney, which I did watch, is not exactly new. It came out about a month ago or several weeks ago, if I'm correct there. So besides that, the fact that it's being censored for a viewer asking a question is ridiculous, but it also underscores once again that if you have even the slightest mention of or slightest question about so-called election integrity, that is verboten to the social media censorship gods. You're not allowed to even utter those words, apparently, without being redacted.
This is what is so troubling to me. This is conversations about elections, talking about COVID. We could get this could get taken down just because I said the word COVID. That's where we're at. So this is something that I said this on, I think it was Bitch the other night. It's an election. It's something that directly impacts the lives of every single person on earth, really. I mean, certainly in the United States, but what happens in the United States affects the globe. So really it impacts everybody on earth. The same with COVID. That also impacts literally every human being on earth. I should be able to talk about that. We should be able to talk about that. People should be able to cover that any way they want to. all conversations should be able to be had. All perspectives should be allowed to be heard. All information should be readily available to anybody who wants it, even if you disagree with it. If you disagree with it, then prove your case better. But you don't get to just completely shut down conversation, and you certainly don't get to take down videos from people who are literally just journalists asking questions. And like Primo pointed out, not even a question that was his question. Somebody in his audience asked him to ask that question. So, I mean, it's just really, it's been ridiculous for a long time. And I think it's going to get bad, really, really
And
bad.
and we're all smart enough to see what they're doing. They're trying to control the narrative, and they're trying to quash any questioning of that narrative, whether it's by people who are creating content or people who are engaging with that content. And it's frustrating, but it should not stop us. It's not going to stop us from covering important stories, including the censorship of allies in this fight against these maniacs. So that's a lesson to take away: is that
We have to stand together.
it's
Have
very
to.
it's very obvious what they're doing,
Yes.
and they wouldn't be doing it if they weren't aware of the fact that they're on the wrong side of history. They know they're wrong. They know that they're pushing a narrative that is about centralized power, which is of huge advantage to them. And even the slightest pushback against that from a viewer who asks a question in a comment section, they're cracking down hard on everybody, trying to make everybody afraid, everybody timid. And we just need to keep putting content out, keep speaking out against them, circumventing them any way we can.
And standing up for each other. I cannot express that enough. I even put out a tweet in defense of Hassan and Vaush, and I hate both of them. Honestly, they're gross, but they shouldn't be banned from Twitch. It's nuts that and what really troubles me is that it seems like the narrowing of the conversation, the acceptable parameters of discussion is narrowing. It's really, I mean, if you even step even slightly outside the approved narrative, they'll shut you down. They will shut you down.
Right.
You can have, I mean, we have a small channel. They're already fucking with us. You know what I mean?
Yeah, and
So
they have whole teams internally and probably outside consultants they deal with who strategize about how to do this in very meticulous ways, how to essentially frustrate and drive people crazy so that they give
they
up.
quit.
And as long as we don't give up, that's what matters. They
Yes.
can keep silencing us on this platform or that platform, but we're always going to find ways. We're not beholden to them. So going forward, that's something all of us should think about. Using YouTube, using Facebook, using Twitter. There's utility to all of them, but I think we should be a lot more discriminating in how we use them.
I think we
And
should diversify more, but I think that we should 100% exploit those platforms for as long as we can. However we can, because they are valuable. I mean, everybody has Facebook. Everybody watches YouTube. You know what I mean? So for now, I think using those resources for as long as humanly possible, like you're going to have to remove me before I'll stop using the platform. And unless something comes along and takes its place or whatever, which it's not, because there is a 100% monopoly, especially YouTube. They just buy out any other video sharing platform if they have to. We're starting to see, thank God for Rockman and Odyssey, like Kit mentioned.
yeah,
They don't
and
censor.
and they offer you the appeal, but it's just a worthless token gesture. I don't know
It's
any.
usually not even dealt with with human beings. It's some computer program, some algorithm that decides you said a trigger word. I think it was Kit that also said that it happened so quick that nobody even had time to watch. Surely nobody had time to watch the video. Ours was only up for 12 hours, but I mean, I think it's just if you say trigger words now, they've just gotten to that point where it's just some computer algorithm. They go through to see what you're talking about, and if you say a bad word, then you can get taken down. It's nuts.
Yeah, and Jason Burmis has been dealing with an incredible amount of censorship on his YouTube channel, and
Mm-hmm.
going
Lots of people
through
have,
he's been
really.
going through a lengthy appeals process, and just when it seems like he might be getting some traction in his favor, they leverage another strike against him, and
Mm-hmm.
it's a pretty futile process. But um, as I said, we should keep pushing our content on there as much as we can without giving into their rules, without self-censoring. Because even now, if you self-censor, there's no telling what they're going to pick out and take you down for. So if the chances are that you're going to get taken down and you're putting up content on YouTube, then just put it all out there because um, there's a bit more of a sting to it for me if you get taken down even after being careful about what you've
Yeah.
said. So
I don't want to self-censor. I shouldn't have to. I don't want to. I shouldn't have to. That's the thing. I shouldn't have
right.
to. I shouldn't have to. I'm not threatening anybody. I'm not like plotting anything nefarious. We're having conversations about really serious issues that directly impact every human being on earth. And we're not saying anything that's crazy, or you know what I mean? These are legitimate questions, concerns, conversations. This is the kind of discourse that needs to be had. There needs to be, you know what I'm saying, like on
Mhm.
everything you should be able to talk about it. You're grown-ass adults, have conversations, it's okay. You know what I mean? The conversations don't hurt. Like, I think we need to, use our words.
Yeah. Well, it boils down to the fact that they know there are a lot of us out here with intelligence, with integrity, with sincerity, and we see through what they're doing. And they are afraid of us. That's why they are trying to consolidate their power and come down on us with their iron fist.
Yeah.
And there are more of us than there are of them. They know that, and that their power, as unlimited as it might seem right now, is limited.
Yes.
And these are moves of desperation. We have to see them as moves of desperation, even if they seem unilateral and impossible to fight. Um, they're not impossible to fight, and they can only go on so long. And there is hope. That's
There
my
is.
that's my Christmas season pep talk.
That was very enthusiastic, Jesse.
There's hope.
There's hope, guys. That's how I feel, though. If we're being honest, that's how I feel. I mean, it really is that meme. The what is it? The little counter. What the fuck is that called? Where it like bounces back and forth between we're fucked and there's hope. And that's the activist brain. That's exactly what that is.
Yeah.
I don't think any of us would be doing what we're doing if we didn't think there was hope. So we just have to hold on to that. Hold on to that. Hold on to
Yeah.
that, guys.
Don't let them drive you crazy.
I mean,
Stick
too late for some of us, but
Yeah, but stick to your principles and
yeah.
see through the
And breathe.
bullshit.
Remember to breathe, y'all. Remember to breathe. Okay. Should we move along to Stella's statement on the recent Assange
Sure.
appeal? Okay, so yesterday there was a deadline for Assange's defense team to enter their appeal. So they're just basically this is just sending it. This is going to go to the Supreme Court. And if this could go a couple different ways. It could go back to the district court and essentially get fast tracked. They could drag it out for a couple years. I think most likely they're going to try to drag it out for as long as possible. But Stella released a statement based on the entering of that appeal. So we'll bring that up. Maybe if I can find it. Okay, here we go. This morning at 11:05, Julian Assange filed an application for leave to appeal to the Supreme Court the High Court's ruling that he can be extradited to the U.S. on 3 grounds. The High Court's ruling in USA versus Assange raises 3 points of law of general public importance that have an impact on the procedural and human rights safeguards of a wide range of other types of cases. On December 10th, the High Court upheld the magistrate court's assessment based on the evidence before her that there was a real risk that, should Julian Assange be extradited to the United States, he would be subjected to near total isolation, including under the regimes of SAMS, which is special administrative measures, or ADX, which is administrative maximum prison, and that such isolation would cause his mental condition to deteriorate to such a degree that there was a high risk of suicide. These findings led the lower court to block the extradition under Section 91 of the Extradition Act, which bans, quote, oppressive extraditions. Um, However, the High Court overturned the lower court's decision to block the extradition based solely on the fact that after the U.S. lost the extradition case on January 4th, 2021, the U.S. State Department sent a letter to the UK Foreign Office containing conditional assurances in relation to Julian Assange's placement under SAMS and ADX. The assurances letter explicitly states in points 1 and 4 that, quote, the United States retains the power, end quote, to, quote, impose SAMS, end quote, on Mr. Assange and to, quote, designate Mr. Assange to ADX, end quote, should he say or do anything since January 4, 2021, that would cause the U.S. government to determine in its subjective assessment that Julian Assange should be placed under SAMS conditions and or in ADX Florence. These conditional assurances alone were considered sufficient by the High Court to overturn the lower court's decision. I want to pause here for a second because this is really important. So they lost in January. The extradition was denied. Obviously, they appealed that. And when they appealed it, they then handed the defense team this list of assurances that they were offering to Julian Assange. So one of them was that he would not be put under special administrative measures. One of them was that he would not be held in ADX Florence. And like this paragraph just said, they left themselves a backdoor to every single one of these assurances. There is no credibility to these whatsoever. Like it said, they've left themselves the ability to designate, should he say or do anything since January 4th, 2021, that would cause the U.S. government. So basically, if he does something that they deem so terrible, they can then designate him, worthy of ADX Florence or worthy of special administrative measures. However, they also don't need either one of those things. Special administrative measures is just one. They now have communications management units, which is what Daniel Hale's being held in. And ADX Florence is certainly not the only supermax prison in the United States. So, none of this stuff means anything. And the fact that the UK court took it at face value is offensive. it's a farce.
And just that term that's used, conditional assurances,
yes,
is almost oxymoronic.
Yes, it's genuinely offensive. It's offensive to it should offend your, like, come on. Nobody should fall for that. Nobody, certainly not a high court in the United Kingdom. Like, come on. It's just silly, honestly. It's just another completely ridiculous aspect of this case, but everything's completely ridiculous. So
yeah, the U.S., to say the least, has been nothing but a dishonest actor this whole time. So why would anybody believe that they're suddenly going to
they just got caught like plotting to murder him, and the UK court's like, oh, you promise you won't put him under special administrative measures? Okay. Like, really? They were just gonna kill him. Like, they were talking about shootouts in the streets of London and taking out the tires of Russian airplanes, and this was all just revealed. And you're taking the assurances of that same country that you won't put him under special administrative measures. It's ridiculous on its face. It's laughable. Another thing that is just, it's ridiculous beyond measure, really. And the fact that it's just happening and everybody, it's like it's normal. Like, this is just fine. It's nuts. It's crazy business. So it continues. Under English law, in order for the application to have a chance to be considered by the Supreme Court, first, the same High Court judges who ordered Julian Assange's extradition must certify that at least one of the Supreme Court appeal grounds is a point of law of general public importance, which is under Section 114 of the 2003 Extradition Act. Julian Assange's application for leave to appeal to the Supreme Court is therefore currently under consideration by the High Court judges. It is not known how long it will take for the decision to come down, but it is not expected before the third week of January. For background, you can see the filing, blah, 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 which I can, if you guys want to see it, I can show the filing as well. The actual letter. But yeah, this is now going to go, this is pushing this back until the third week of January, at least. He's spending his third Christmas in Supermax prison on remand. He's not being held under any charges or anything. He's just being held on remand, basically because the U.S. said so. It really is, all of this is genuinely ridiculous.
Yeah, and this can be traced directly back to Obama, who did away with habeas corpus. And that wasn't just domestically, as we're seeing with Assange. It now seems to be a precedent that's applied internationally. So,
well, and just think about what that next precedent will set if he's allowed to be extradited. And that's opening a floodgate of stuff. That will be the first time that a journalist has been charged under the Espionage Act. That opens a whole can of worms. I mean, I know I say this all the time and I sound like a broken record, but the United States is seeking global jurisdiction over information and journalism, and that's not good. Do you really want the United States to have the authority to arrest and extradite any journalist? Which journalists, if you think about it, they also define that term. So when it was convenient for them, for Julian Assange to not be a journalist, then they tried to use that. And when it's convenient for somebody to be a journalist, they'll absolutely use that as well. So it could come for any of us, anybody. If you have a blog, if you have like a YouTube show, if you could, I mean, this could potentially apply to you, anybody, anywhere in the world. That's nuts. That's a crazy amount of power to have for anything that they deem, again, they define those terms. Anything that they deem to be, they can call it a national security threat. Shit, they've already named all of us domestic violent extremists, essentially. So this is just another aspect. It's another power grab, and this is a big one. This is a big one, you guys. This is a big old power grab.
Absolutely.
It's terrifying. Yeah. So, I mean, again, broken record, but please get loud about this stuff. We're really starting to see movement, like real movement, and that could just be me wanting to be hopeful, but we're starting to, like, finally Susan Sarandon went to a protest. Like, we've been trying to get her. I'm not like slamming her or anything. I welcome aboard everybody when they come along, right? Whatever your pace is. But she was somebody who honestly disappointed me and has been disappointing me. She doesn't really talk about it. And when she does, it's like she'll retweet somebody else who said something about Julian Assange. And she has a huge voice, and I just wish she would use it. I get disappointed in people that I have a lot of respect for, and she's one of them. So yeah, but we're starting, like, she went to a protest, and Randy Credico has been doing a great job. They had a protest today. So there's candlelight vigils happening. I have my candles lit right now. We're doing the thing on Twitter. If you guys light a candle, you don't have to have a picture of Assange, but just like maybe write on a piece of paper, free Assange or candles for Assange. Take a picture of it, post it on Twitter, use the hashtag candles for Assange. Tag the Justice Department and Biden and whoever else you can think of, your own personal senators and congresspeople. His third Christmas, his third Christmas in a supermax, y'all, being tortured to death for exposing war crimes. I mean, that's
yeah.
It's so surreal.
I remember that April day in 2019. It seems like forever ago, and
it does seem like
it's really hard to wrap one's head around the fact that he's been in the torture conditions he's been in for that amount of time. And
just think about what you've done since April 11th, 2019. I've done a lot of things. I've been places. I've met cool people. I've, heard lots of music and, read books and articles and had conversations and played with my kids. And that's, when you think about all of the time that he's lost, it makes me really, really sad, because that's something you can't ever get back. It's like when somebody is wrongfully convicted of something and you hear about them getting out like 38 years later, that like just destroys me. It's such a loss.
And we can see the utter deterioration he's undergone physically and mentally. And if he is released, he's never going to fully recover from that.
It's not possible.
Permanently damaged. And that is just one of many crimes that the US and UK have committed against him.
And I realize that I'm the cult leader, so what I'm going to say here will be blown out of proportion, but he is objectively one of our greatest minds. I mean, he's brilliant. If you go back, they used to say for every wrong decision, there's a video of Bernie trying to stop it. That's a Julian Assange. Go back and watch him talk about Afghanistan 10 fucking years ago. Or, watch him talk about any number of things that are happening right now. The surveillance state that we're living under, dude called it ages ago. He called out Facebook in 2014. Like, he's been on top of all of these things. And he is legitimately brilliant. And we have caged that mind for over a decade. And it sucks. Hey, Mr. Denis. That's one of my favorite trolls. Sorry. Thanks for coming to Facts too, man. Usually he shows up for a bitch. Hi, friend.
Is he trolling us?
Yeah. It's
Oh,
not my
okay.
guest. That's my co-host, Mr. Janie. He gives everybody threat levels, which make no sense whatsoever.
Oh,
Um,
are they
all right.
color coded?
I think I don't know. Was that you who had him color coded, or somebody else? Maybe I think had like purple, Operation Purple, or Team Purple. I don't know.
Well, I'm
Yeah.
clearly at red, so
None of his assessments make any sense. Like there's no cohesion to like the number that you get. None of it makes sense, dude.
yeah.
But I have really genuinely terrible trolls, so every time I find one who isn't, he's not my guest again. You're not pleasant, Jesse.
I'm not
Oh, hey
pleasant.
Warren. Yeah. All right. So what else do we have?
All right, so
Which do you want me to pull up
since
now?
we're a little bit on the foreign policy tip, if you can pull up the Reuters piece, and right now there is a trial happening in the Netherlands with regard to flight MH17. That was Malaysia Air Flight 17, which was brought down over Ukraine in 2014. Incidentally, or maybe not, on the exact same date that TWA Flight 800 was brought down in the US in 1996. So, in this Reuters piece here from December 22nd, you can see that prosecutors seek life terms in Dutch murder trial over flight MH17. And this is a relatively brief article, so I will read through it. At the top, you can see a picture that was taken at the, I don't want to say crash site because it was taken down by supposedly by a Buk surface to air missile in eastern Ukraine. So moving down, so this is out of Amsterdam on, as I said, December 22nd. Dutch prosecutors on Wednesday demanded life sentences for 3 Russians and a Ukrainian charged with murder over the shooting down of a passenger jet over Ukraine in 2014. They said the defendants, who are all at large, helped supply a missile system that Russian backed separatists used to fire a rocket at Malaysia Airlines flight MH17. All 298 people on board were killed. Prosecutor Manon Ritterbecks demanded life terms for all four named as Igor Girkin, Sergei Dubinsky, Oleg Pulatov, and Leonid Karchenko. Most of the victims were Dutch nationals. The Dutch government holds Russia responsible. Authorities in Moscow deny involvement. Outside the courtroom, Piet Ploeg, who lost his brother, that may be Plague, I'm not sure, who lost his brother, nephew, and sister in law in the crash, said he had waited a long time to hear the prosecution make its recommendation. Quote, "It's a relief that the prosecutors demanded the maximum sentence," unquote, he told reporters. Even if the 4 men were never jailed, quote, "it is just as important that the world knows who is responsible," unquote, he said. After years of collecting evidence, an international team of investigators concluded in May 2018 that the launcher used to shoot down the aircraft, which was en route from Amsterdam to Kuala Lumpur, belonged to Russia's 53rd Anti-Aircraft Missile Brigade. And there's a link there where you can read more, and that link goes to another Reuters piece. Prosecutors said on Wednesday the defendants were linked to Russian-backed rebels in eastern Ukraine and played significant roles in the events that led to the downing of the jet. Russians Pulatov, Dubinsky, and Gherkin, and Ukrainian Karchenko have all denied involvement. On Wednesday, Dubinsky told Dutch broadcaster RTL that the hefty sentencing demands were, quote, "totally predictable," unquote. Quote, "Our guilt has already been determined," unquote, he was quoted as saying. Lawyers for another suspect, Pulatov, said he followed the prosecution closing arguments via the court's live stream, but did not give his reaction. Relying on satellite images, social media posts, and intercepted phone calls, prosecutors say the 4 men worked together to get a Buk missile system from Russia into eastern Ukraine to reinforce separatists. Quote, by shooting down MH17 with a Buk, the defendants used devastating violence. They planned this violence beforehand and they organized it in close cooperation, unquote, the prosecutor Thisberger said. I may not be pronouncing that right, but this, it looks like. In recordings played to the court earlier in the week, men identified by the prosecution as the suspects could be heard discussing moving, quote, our Buk, unquote, to a field from where flight MH17 was attacked. They then celebrated the success of, quote, our boys, unquote, when they brought down what they mistakenly thought was a Ukrainian military plane. The target turned out to be MH17. And I'm just going to pause here. Keep in mind that just before this, in March of 2014, there was the Malaysia Airlines flight that went missing. And to this day, nobody really knows what happened to it, although supposedly pieces of the fuselage have now been found, but the official determination of what happened to that civilian airliner has yet to come forward. So this was the downing of MH17 was sort of compounded by the loss of another Malaysian airliner several months earlier. So continuing on here, prosecutors said they were also trying to identify the people who fired the missile and the Russian officials who sent the Buk to eastern Ukraine. The trial of the 4 suspects started 20 months ago. Only Pulatov has sent lawyers to represent him, while the others have not cooperated with the court and are being tried in absentia. Closing arguments from Pulatov's lawyers are expected in March and a verdict by the end of 2022. So, digging a little bit deeper here, let's bring up the map, if you will, of eastern Ukraine and the Donbass region, and Donetsk, of course, is in there. So this is the region from which the missile was apparently fired. And as you can see, this is the contentious area where Ukrainian rebels are fighting with so-called Russian-backed separatists. This is just northeast of Ukraine. I'm sorry, just northeast of Crimea, butting right up against Russia. But what's interesting about this case that's taking place in the Dutch courts is not only that 3 of the defendants are being tried in absentia, but also that Russia offered to provide all of the evidence it had collected to the court for its trial, and that was rejected. So that should raise some red flags right there. And what's also suspicious too, going back to the Reuters piece, is remember that the evidence is largely relying on satellite images, social media posts, and intercepted phone calls. And some of this information is credited back to Bellingcat, which is a dubious source, to say the least.
Yeah.
So the satellite images of whatever weapon systems were in place, I don't think, as far as I last read, that the images revealed the firing system for the Buk missile being where the prosecutors contend it was. And then the intercepted phone call fragments I've heard do not in and of themselves sound damning. And it's hard to trace them back to exactly what those on the calls are referring to. And what's also of interesting note is that this Buk missile system was I forget either if it was manufactured or acquired in 1986. So this is something that's been kicking around for a while. And on top of that, Russian separatists had taken down Ukrainian military planes prior to the downing of MH17. So that, given that fact, that was a war zone, still is a war zone. Yet Ukraine never closed the airspace to civilian aircraft, hence why MH17 was flying over that uh, region. And yeah, it was taken down by a Buk missile. There's no denying that. But as to who took that plane down and why, I think the question is still very much up in the air, despite this ongoing trial. Um, and it should also raise questions that only four individuals are being held responsible for this. Um, it seems like a very narrowing approach at trying to prosecute somebody here. And of course, like many things that are happening, this situation is mired in levels of details and obfuscated and obscured information. So it could well be that Russian separatists were behind this, but it seems more so likely that Ukrainian quote unquote freedom fighters, as they like to refer to themselves,
Yeah.
brought this plane down as a provocational act. And when we look at what's happening now with the U.S. And more so NATO being led by the U.S., essentially trying to start a hot war with Russia, um, it makes sense why this sort of false flag, if you will, would be carried out. And it's also interesting timing that the prosecution um, is handing down its sentences now, demanding life sentences, while this standoff between ostensibly NATO and Russia is ramping up. And if you're paying attention to that news, you see the constant back and forth with um, Russia being willing to talk. Its condition essentially is that NATO stops advancing eastward, which
It
it
promised.
promised. Even though Jens Stoltenberg, the head of NATO, is now coming out and saying that that promise was never made. To my knowledge, it was made to Gorbachev at the end of the 80s, uh, and has been a huge part and parcel of why um, NATO has been allowed to do what it's done in particularly Eastern Europe since its advent. Um, so lots of
Well, and
questions.
moreover, who cares if it was made or not? Frankly, why do we don't get to? It's they're a sovereign country. They don't want you near their shit. That
Right,
okay?
right. And if you look at what the US and NATO are putting out there as the threat from Russia, it's that Russia is simply moving around its military forces within its own sovereign borders. And this is in response to US NATO provocations, full stop. There's no doubt about it, no matter how much the Western media tries to spin it. And if you go back to the very beginning of this latest iteration of a standoff, the US essentially invented this story that Russia was planning for a war with Ukraine. And at the time when this kicked off, there were people both in Ukraine, in Crimea, which is essentially part of Russia now, and most likely not going back to Ukraine. Historically, it's been a part of Russia for a very long time. And um, at that time, there were people in that region who were saying, we don't know what the Western media is talking about. It seems like they're setting up the grounds for a hot war. And it turns out that that's exactly what has happened, that the West has manufactured this. And now it's really at a simmering point with the latest accusations being that Russia is planning a nuclear war on Ukraine, which makes no sense whatsoever. Uh, Russia using nuclear weapons against its neighbor is obviously going to cause considerable harm to Russians themselves. A nuclear uh, weapon isn't just confined to where it's detonated or used. There's obviously radioactive spread that occurs afterward, all sorts of harm. Um, and this is just a completely um, overblown, ridiculous
Mm.
claim that's being floated now. But the Western media, of course, is running with it. And on top of that, we at the same time are seeing a lot of other Western moves taken toward Russia that can only be called, at the very least, provocation. So if you bring up that RT piece on RT
Oh,
Deutsch.
balls. Hold on. I had the wrong button. Da, 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 da. Okay, sorry. There was two RT ones. I want to make sure I got the right one.
Yeah, it's okay.
Too many buttons you have to push. I wish that StreamYard would fix that.
So I won't go through this whole piece, but right now, this is happening, and it seems to be in line with the other provocations against Russia. RT Deutsch launched recently, and as you can see in the subheadline, Germany has forced a major European satellite operator to drop RTDE as part of Berlin's ongoing crackdown on the Russian publicly funded broadcaster's new 24-hour German language channel. YouTube also removed
Of course they did.
RT's stream of RTDE. And this is just flat out censorship in the name of provocation. RT, as Patrick Henningsen has pointed out, provides at least a slightly different perspective on events, especially geopolitical events, than most European media outlets do, um, and also gives the alternative or Russian perspective on what's happening, rather than this constant NATO shaped perspective. And as many of you well know, Germany is essentially the de facto leader of the European Union. So Germany taking down RTDE, essentially censoring it outright, um, is very obviously a provocation toward Russia in line with NATO. Um, and then if you add to that the fact that the Nord Stream 2 pipeline, which runs from Russia to Germany, but provides natural gas throughout the European Union, the fact that that is up and ready to go, but has not been approved by German EU authorities to open and start providing natural gas to Europeans who are now facing a tremendous natural gas shortage and just an absurd inflation in natural gas prices. As winter comes in, you start to look at all of this together, and you can see that there is some sort of orchestration going on behalf of NATO, its European contingent, and the U.S. spearheading all of this. The constant back and forth with the U.S. being willing to negotiate with Russia, then setting preconditions and conditions.
And trying to control the narrative entirely.
Right, trying to control the narrative. So what is this all leading toward? It's hard to say, and I'm wary of making predictions, but it does remind me of what happened with regard to World War One, when um, one of the worst wars in human history was set off, and it was ostensibly set off so that the financial masters of the world, think the Rockefellers, think of the banking families and cartels, which still very much exist, the international banking families and cartels, so that they could impose sort of their version back then of a great financial reset. And they succeeded in large part in doing so, although it didn't really come to fruition so much until after World War II. But it could be that that's what we're seeing happening now, this push against Russia for a hot war that would completely upend the fragile stability of especially Eastern European bloc countries, and it would essentially be a NATO Western European war against Russia, which would have devastating consequences all over the world. Of course, with Russia being involved in Syria. Um, Russia becoming closer with China economically and militarily. So lots of moving parts here. Hard to say how it's going to pan out. Um, but that is a theory that I have, that we could be moving toward something on the level of World War One, to sort of provide air cover, no pun intended, for the financial restructuring that I think we all know is underway right now under the guise of COVID. And how convenient would it be to have something akin to a world war or a large scale war with the very real threat of nuclear annihilation to provide further air cover for that restructuring? So, something to think about there. And then I want to just bring up that Reaper feed piece, if you see that link. This is an article from March 21 from reaperfeed.com. And just a moment as we bring this up. So it's titled "An Interview with a British Fighter in Donbass," which, if you remember the map that we just had up, Donbass is the eastern region of Ukraine. And of course, Donetsk is a town, if you will, that is a very contentious area within the Donbass. But I'm bringing this piece up because you can see that just about anyone from anywhere can travel to Donbass right now and fight with the so-called Ukrainian freedom fighters who are fighting against Russia. And this is an interview with a British individual who previously fought with the Kurdish YPG in northern Syria, and is now freelancing, if he is still there, in eastern Ukraine against Russia. And I bring this up both to point out how easily it is for solo private mercenaries and also private mercenary firms to inject themselves into this conflict. And there are reports coming out that there are both there are at least British mercenaries on the ground in eastern Ukraine to help in the fight against Russian aggression. So it's been a very messy situation, and it's getting messier by the day, thanks largely in part to U.S. NATO provocation. And it's as they say in the mainstream biz, a hot spot that we really need to pay attention to, because even if it doesn't pan out as having any relation to what's going on with the COVID-19 agenda and the financial restructuring involved there, which I find hard to believe, but let's say it's completely separate. It's still a very catastrophic um, event that is very poised to take place and something that is certainly going to reverberate around the world in very harmful ways, geopolitically and otherwise. So we should definitely pay attention to this. I recommend reading this piece in particular because you really get an idea into the mindset of the so-called freedom fighters in eastern Ukraine. As you can see, if you go up to the top.
Sorry, hold on. I was just sharing it in the chat.
Okay.
Okay.
If you go up to the top, so the title, you can see that he's referred to as Cossack Gundi, and the Cossacks. There's a link to Britannica I brought up. You can go to that if you want. But for those who don't know, the Cossacks were a peoples from the 15th and 16th centuries in the region we're talking about. In Russian, it's pronounced Kazakh, and it comes from the Turkic Kazakh, which means adventurer or free man. So it refers to a group of people from the 15th and 16th centuries in this region of the world who, according to Encyclopedia Britannica, they had a tradition of independence and finally received privileges from the Russian government in return for military services. So calling this British individual who's fighting of his own volition in eastern Ukraine on the side of so-called Eastern, on the side of so-called Ukrainian freedom fighters, you can see that they're harking back to this time in history and sort of glorifying the Cossacks, who were regarded and still are regarded in a sense as freedom fighters. So an interesting historical through line there. But it also gets at the fact that what's happening now has very, very deep historical roots. This isn't a new conflict. This didn't start in 2014 with Euromaidan. This goes back centuries. And we can look to the language being used as well as many other aspects to see that. So this is something we should definitely keep an eye on for the reasons I mentioned earlier. And look past absolutely the Western narratives that are being spun out with regard to this. You don't have to like Putin. You don't have to like Russia. Forget that nonsense. Look at what's actually happening, the forces at play here, the convenient timing of the trial with regard to MH17, and what kind of damning picture that would paint Russia if these individuals uh, are actually somehow rounded up and imprisoned for life and considered officially guilty of taking down MH17. All the potential here, once again, to start off something globally catastrophic. So for the umpteenth time, please pay attention to this, and we will, of course, be doing the same in shows going forward. So, moving on from there, I wanted to uh, go a little domestic and look at the emails, the Fauci Collins emails that were recently leaked. Um, or actually not leaked, they were revealed via a FOIA request. And these, of course, the story, of course, has been published in many outlets, but AIER, the American Institute for Economic Research, published a pretty good deconstruction of this. And
Your audio's weird, Jesse.
is that me?
Yeah.
Okay, that must be my neighbors downstairs that are getting picked up.
No, you keep kind of you fade out and then you come back and then it's a little weird.
How does it sound now?
It's good.
All right, I'll sit closer to the mic. That's probably the problem. So we have this piece here from AIER, Fauci emails and some alleged science. And I'm sure a lot of our viewers and listeners are familiar with what happened recently. A FOIA request revealed an email from Francis Collins, who was the head of the NIH. He is either outgoing or completely gone at this point. And he sent this email to Lord Fauci back on October 8th of 2020. And this was with regard to the Great Barrington Declaration, which, if you're not familiar with that, it was penned by three epidemiologists. One is Jay Bhattacharya, who is Dr. Jay Bhattacharya from Stanford, Dr. Martin Kulldorff, formerly of Harvard, and Dr. Sunitra Gupta from Oxford. And in this piece here from AIER, you can see the email, and I'll read it. It's from Francis Collins to Anthony Fauci, Cliff Lane, who's at the NIH, NIAID, which of course Fauci heads. It's CC'd to Lawrence Tabak or Tabak. I'm not sure. I don't have any details on who he is, so I can't speak to him. But you do see there that he is affiliated with the National Institutes of Health. The subject is the Great Barrington Declaration, and this declaration was penned by the three epidemiologists I just mentioned in opposition to blanket lockdowns as a response to COVID-19, calling out these blanket lockdowns as ineffective and, in fact, very harmful, which has absolutely proven to be correct. So this brief email here, I'll read it. Hi, Tony and Cliff. See, and then there's a link to the Great Barrington Declaration, which I encourage everybody to visit and read. And if you're so inclined, you can sign it along with thousands of other signatories, including some very well-respected doctors, scientists, etc. This proposal from the three fringe epidemiologists who met with the secretary seems to be getting a lot of attention, and even a co-signature from Nobel Prize winner Mike Levitt at Stanford. There needs to be a quick and devastating published takedown of its premises. I don't see anything like that online yet. Is it underway? Francis. So, of course, let's point out the use of fringe epidemiologists. I just listed the university affiliations of these three individuals. Of course, the legitimacy and strength of their work goes well beyond their university affiliations. You can read through this piece and also many other pieces and research for yourselves to confirm that. But what I want to look at this here, the context in which I want to look at this here is, first of all, it's not surprising that this would happen, that the Great Barrington Declaration would be written and published, and that there would be this response from particularly Francis Collins and Anthony Fauci. As we know, they have been the primary public faces of the official COVID-19 narrative, not just in the US, but around the world. So of course they would respond this way to something they perceive as a threat to the narrative they're trying to put forth and control. So not so shocking to me that behind the scenes until now they were orchestrating in this way to smear and take down not just the three epidemiologists, Bhattacharya, Kuldorf, and Gupta, um, but to smear the Great Barrington Declaration and the very legitimate argument it puts forth. Um, Not surprising that they would do that. Um, so it leads me to question why this email is being released and able to garner such public attention. And I want to go back to the use of fringe epidemiologists and think about it in this light. So this has been brought to the public. A lot of people have seen this email. Um, as I said, it's not surprising that this would be the response of Collins and Fauci. Um, but a lot of the public is going to see this and think of the epidemiologists as fringe. Um, and at the time, it may have been considered fringe to oppose lockdowns, given all the madness and uncertainty of that time, which, as you see from the date, was October of 2020. So, well over a year ago. We've learned a lot since then. Um, it could be that this is a calculated release to paint these particular epidemiologists as fringe, but when you really drill down into where these epidemiologists stand, they're not taking a fringe stance at all. In fact, their stances aren't really revolutionary in any
No.
sense. And I say that because I can't speak for Gupta, but I can speak for um, Bhattacharya and Kuldorf, both of whom were guests on Max Blumenthal's show Foreign Agents yesterday, which I do recommend people watch. It was a very good show. But my problem with these epidemiologists, with Bhattacharya and Kuldorf, is as they stand against lockdowns and in support of the working class who were far and away the class most affected by the lockdowns, they still advocate for the so-called vaccines for the so-called vulnerable segments of the population and contend that um, we know, this is them saying, we know that they can be safe and effective for certain vulnerable segments of the population. Now, mind you, there is no clinical data to back up that claim. And if you look at the UK data that's being released from the UK Health Security Agency, as it's been rebranded, you can see that most of the people in the vulnerable segment of the population, so 80 or older, um, these are usually frail people with comorbidities. If you look at the death rates as they're broken down in the UK, the majority of people in that age bracket who are dying are vaccinated, considered fully vaccinated. Um, and their number, as I said, it's a majority. It is hugely beyond the unvaccinated individuals in that age group who are dying. And this is week after week. If you want further analysis on this, I recommend watching um, Ryan Christian's show, The Last American Vagabond, particularly the last few episodes. But he's constantly drilling into this data as it's released on I think, bi or tri-weekly basis by the UK Health Security Agency. And we see the same trend week after week that the elderly and vulnerable, by and large, far and away, most of those who are dying are considered fully vaccinated. So that flies in the face of what these epidemiologists are saying. And so there could be a concerted move here to paint these epidemiologists who still have some support for the so called vaccines um, as fringe, because what does that do? Um, in a way, it further legitimizes these completely illegitimate and harmful, these deadly injections. That's speculation on my part, but I'm trying to look at this, beyond just the headlines, the hoorah about, oh my God, look what's happening to these epidemiologists behind the scenes. Bhattacharya said in a tweet, "Now I know what it feels like to be attacked by my own government." Hey, welcome to the club. It's not as big of a deal as it's being made out to be. Of course, it's an attack on actual science. But the fact that at least two of these very eminent scientists are still out there and advocating for these toxic agents to be injected into so called vulnerable people, when the data is showing that these vulnerable people, um, even when they're fully vaccinated, are dying at a rate that makes the unvaccinated rate pale in comparison, at least according to UK data. We have to question what's going on here. As we've seen throughout the whole COVID-19 madness, there are layers upon layers of obfuscation and mis and disinformation going on. So I think that's a way to look at it. And I do agree with the argument that we need to look out for the working class here. They are being systematically attacked by
Yes.
mandates and all other kinds of draconian measures. But at the same time, if you are purporting to advocate for the working class by arguing against lockdowns, then you have to do the same with regard to the so called vaccines. Because if you're advocating for somebody in the working class who's considered vulnerable to get quote unquote vaccinated when there is a very real and likely chance of harm or even death from that injection, that is not helping out the working class. There's a flaw in that argument there. And I don't know why these individuals keep pushing this toxic injection, but they do. And that's something we should be wary of. Um, and that is not to call into question their science or anything separate from the fact that they continue to advocate in part for these injections for some people. And even Robert Malone, the inventor of the mRNA technology, recently came out on the UK's GBN News with Neil Oliver. And he said he's starting to think that there are no benefits whatsoever for anybody from these injections, including the frail and elderly and those with comorbidities. And he says in that same interview, which you can easily find on Twitter, just search for um, Robert Malone, Neil Oliver, GBN. It was on GBN, a news outlet which is pretty prominent in the UK. And he said recently that in the coming weeks, he's probably going to have to reevaluate and recalibrate his stance on the injections and take the stance now that these are harmful for everybody, which I think a lot of us here can agree based on all of the evidence that continues to come out that they are, whether it's from the collapsing athletes, whether it's from the VAERS data, whether it's from the yellow card system data in the UK.
We should mention that we're not doctors and we're not offering any medical advice, blah, 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 blah.
No, but because those who are in official capacities and are supposed to be giving us an honest assessment of what's going on are not.
Yes.
It falls to us to look at this and analyze it in the
And
best
it's
way we
clear
can.
we're being lied to, you guys. I don't know why this is even up for debate anymore. It's clear that we've been lied to this entire time, repeatedly. I mean, they're still doing it right now in your face. I mean, they're doing it in your face. They're telling Dr. Fauci is saying it's dangerous to have Christmas parties, but there are college bowl games happening around the country, hundreds of thousands of people in a stadium, and that's fine. But you can't have like a Christmas party with your grandma. That's ridiculous. It's ridiculous. On its face, it's ridiculous. They're lying to you. They're manipulating you. They're using fear to control you. I mean, I don't know how much more obvious they could make it. And listen, I'm not telling anybody to not get the injection. You want to get it, that's you do you, fam. You do you. But I'm really, really, really done with the mandate conversation. I really am done with the mandate conversation. You
Yeah.
can yell hospital beds all you want. I'm
See,
done with your conversation.
See, I understand that, and my argument is that there should be no advocacy for anybody getting these injections. I won't tell somebody what they should or should not do. But the fact is that as long as the injections exist as a cudgel, there are always going to be mandates. The mandates can't happen unless there's a cudgel to enforce them. And right now, the so called vaccines are that cudgel. And I'm somebody who's been injured by them. And that's why I've been so outspoken in the past 4 months since getting the second and last one I will ever get against all of this, because it does hurt people, and it's unfortunate that I had to experience it personally. Although on a much luckier level, I have to say, than a lot of people. But these are very harmful, toxic substances, of which there is no data available for even the midterm effects of these, let alone the long term effects of these. And there's plenty of European data that comes from Pfizer itself to back this up. There's no data with regard to how these affect pregnant women. No data with regard to how they affect women who are trying to get pregnant. No data with regard to, get this, how they affect the frail and the elderly and those with comorbidities, the group that these so-called fringe epidemiologists are advocating uh, may receive a benefit from the injection. So there's no science to back this up. And I really think that these individuals need to stop making these claims because they're dangerous. They're based on no data whatsoever, and they can only lead to harm. It's dishonest of them, and they need to be called out for it. I fully support their advocacy for the working class. But the flaw in that argument is that if you're advocating for an injection for somebody in the working class that could very likely hurt or kill them, you're not doing any service to the working class. So that's something that needs to be thought about there. And to say that, uh, I'm okay with somebody who advocates for certain people getting quote unquote vaccinated as long as they're not forcing, standing up for forcing that vaccination. Again, as long as the cudgel of the vaccination, quote unquote, exists, there is always going to be a mandate to be applied. A mandate can't exist without a cudgel. So, something to think about there. Another context in which to look at the release of this email. And I'll leave it at that. But I did
Well,
really.
before we get any farther, we didn't have this really planned, but because we're talking about it, it's kind of funny. The whole hospital beds thing. Jesse, I don't even know if you watched the Graham Elwood Jimmy Dore debate the other day. Debate. It wasn't even a debate. It was honestly cringy.
I haven't watched any of Graham Elwood has been putting out or saying, but when it comes up in the context of whatever, um,
he's
I look
it's
at it, but I I know where he's coming from. I mean, he and Ron Placone as well. So, but go
You know
ahead.
where it's painful. It's painful.
Yeah,
He legitimately thinks that the United States government, who is known for lying and who has a history of experimenting on people and poisoning people, he thinks that they get to mandate that we all have to get vaccinated. And his whole argument, he just kept repeating over and over again, hospital beds, hospital beds, hospital beds, because unvaccinated people take up hospital beds. How dare they?
It's just
He's
fundamentally
ignoring all
untrue.
of, well, and he's ignoring the fact that vaccinated people also get sick and have to go take up hospital beds. And not only that, Jimmy brought this up, and it was really disgusting the way that he brushed it off, because Jimmy was like, okay, well, how about I mean, we have closed an unbelievable amount of hospitals over the past 10, 15, 20 years. It's been ridiculous. And that has been a systematic setup for us being in a position like this where we cannot handle a health crisis. And that's exactly what has happened. And Jimmy brings that up, and he completely was just like, you can bring up those statistics all you want, but the fact is that unvaccinated people take up hospital beds. And,
That's
dude,
not true.
your argument,
Most of the people who are in the hospital right now
even if
across the
that were
world
true, though,
are
he's
considered
completely
vaccinated.
ignoring the history of the fact that we've been closing hospital beds. And then not only that, we're now firing nurses and doctors for refusing
Right.
to go along with this jab. So, his argument is incredibly flawed, really, really, really disappointing. It's pathetic, honestly. It was such a cringy thing to watch. I couldn't even watch the whole thing. I was getting ready to go on bitch, and I think I watched like maybe 10 or 15 minutes when Fiorella and I were hanging out before the show, and we were like watching like a little bit of it. It was painful. It was painful. And the fact that anybody thinks that anybody gets to mandate somebody inject something into their body, that's not, no, we're not on the same team there. Definitely not.
Yeah,
um
I don't know how much research Graham Elwood and Ron Placone do um, with regard to what's happening with the COVID-19 agenda, but it seems like they're very squeamish with how far they're willing to go in their research, and they already have a preconceived idea of
Graham has had
what.
Whitney Webb on his show numerous times, and he still is going. He hosts a show called Government Secrets, and
Right.
he's still all about the mandate. It's embarrassing. Like, I'm honestly just embarrassed for him. It's
Yeah.
bad. It's
Yeah,
bad.
I I can't really speak to Graham or Ron besides the few
Ron, I
things I've
haven't really. I
seen.
didn't know he was. Is he a mandate guy? I didn't know that. I
Well,
didn't know
a
that.
few weeks ago, he tweeted out, "I saw Eric Clapton and the KKK are trending on Twitter, and I immediately thought that Clapton was putting on a benefit concert." Implying that there's a link between Clapton, who received the first injection and is now very outspoken against them because he was harmed by it,
Oh,
and
okay.
that because he's somebody who's speaking out against the injections, making this very juvenile
Yeah.
equivalency between Eric Clapton and the KKK, i.e., the far right, as in, only the far right
Are
in
against
the
vaccine
are
mandates.
against right are against either the mandates or the
God, so
injections themselves.
simple-minded from somebody who should know better. That's what's
Yeah.
disappointing. They
So
should know better.
I don't know much beyond that. So I can't speak to I really can't speak to their positions, other than to speculate and say that it seems that they have some of it has to do with fear, some of it has to do with a lack of research. I don't know where they're getting their facts from, but around the world, I mean,
I think a lot of it's fear, honestly.
just look at Israel, for example, or look at the UK data. Most of the people presenting to the hospitals or being admitted to the hospitals are considered fully vaccinated. And you look at the so-called Omicron variant, it is spreading almost exclusively among those considered fully vaccinated. So, it's very easy to poke holes in what I know of his argument, and I don't know why he's taking the stance that he is.
Somebody suggested that we like pick it apart and like watch it and pick it apart on the show today, and I honestly just don't. I can't. I can't. It's it was really bad. It was really bad. And I felt bad. I think Jimmy felt bad. They used to be friends. I don't know if they're still friends or not. Maybe. But it was just really cringy. It
One
was.
thing one thing I will say is that and this is credit to Jimmy Dore. whom I have nothing but respect and admiration for. Um, I have disagreements sometimes
Yeah, of
with
course.
where he stands, especially with regard to COVID-19 agenda stuff. But no, we all have different perspectives on this, and it's not about being a purist. Um, but kudos to him for being able to bring on Graham Elwood, who's obviously diametrically opposed to where Jimmy stands, and being willing to have that conversation. I mean, that's one of the most important things we need to focus on right now, is having conversations, and not just with like-minded people, with people who stand opposed to us. And if we don't do that, we're just cowing to what those who want to shape and control the narrative want us to do, which is just silence ourselves, be confused, be afraid, and go along with what they tell us. So kudos to Jimmy for having that conversation. And, it would be easy for me to fling all kinds of names and criticisms at both Graham and Ron. But again, I don't know enough about their positions
I
to
don't
to
either.
do to
And I
do
only
that.
saw again, I only saw like 10, maybe 15 minutes of that
And I
debate.
and I wouldn't want to do that. I wouldn't want to analyze it from an outside perspective. I'd want to actually talk to them and try to understand where they're coming from, as opposed to criticizing from afar. Um, but it's unfortunate, to say the least, that they're taking the perspectives they're taking, and
Yes.
hopefully they see the light, as it were.
Yeah.
Because, as you mentioned, Whitney Webb has done fantastic work exposing, not just the dangers of these injections, but how they're connected to a much
Broader
broader,
agenda.
yeah, agenda. And, kudos to Graham for having her on his show and talking about that. I don't know what
It's
they
just
talked
really
about,
weird
but
that he could have her on so many times and, has been very it to me it's just strange when somebody who is generally pretty good about recognizing the bullshit falls apart on a single issue. Do you know what I mean? Like it's really it's like come on, you understand Russiagate, you understand, so that there's like a but then on something like this, it's all of a sudden, nope, this time they're telling us the truth. You know what I mean? Like it's this time. This is the time they're telling us the truth.
yeah,
No,
I can't
no.
I can't help but think that a lot of it stems from fear.
Yeah, I
Um,
think it's almost all
and
fear. You can tell when, if like even just from the 10 or 15 minutes that I watched, you can tell that he's afraid. And I think also he's annoyed because I think he said it a couple times. If everybody would just get vaccinated, I wouldn't have had to cancel my tour. And that's not it, fam. That's not why you haven't that's not why you had to cancel your tour. That's not why that you're mad at the wrong shit. You really are. You're mad at the
yeah,
wrong stuff.
and here's a concise way to think about that and to respond to that. And this comes from Vladimir Zelenko, Dr. Vladimir Zelenko, who practices in Monroe, New York. He developed one of the first early treatment protocols for COVID-19. He was actually the one who treated Donald Trump with hydroxychloroquine, which, of course, smeared hydroxychloroquine as, just junk, outlandish
Yeah.
science, when it's anything but. But this is what he said. He said, take Bill Gates, right? And I'm not saying Bill Gates is the mastermind behind any of this, but he's a very prominent and important actor in what's going on. Bill Gates said in his TED talk that essentially there are too many of us on this planet, and population control, population reduction is something that needs to be pursued. This is the same man who says that we need to, quote unquote, vaccinate the entire planet, 7 billion people, with an experimental gene therapy. And that until we do that, nobody is going to be safe. Nobody can travel safely. Tours will have to be canceled. So Zelenko poses the question, and I pose the question, why would you listen to somebody like Bill Gates who wants less people on Earth
Yeah.
and take and follow his instructions that everybody in the world take this experimental injection,
He's
which is
known for being a nefarious, corrupt as shit motherfucker. I mean, look at what he's done in Africa, you guys. This is not me making that shit. Like, we know he's a bad dude, and we've somehow elevated him to some position of authority on healthcare. He's Bill Gates. He's not a doctor. He's not a scientist. He's some creepy billionaire who has way too much time, money, and power on his hands. I want him nowhere near World Health
and
Policy.
and
Nowhere near it.
exactly. And when you look at it in those terms, I think it makes a lot of sense, or it should make a lot of sense to you. But just one more thing on the hospital beds, I'll say, is that not just now, but going back to the beginning of the so-called pandemic, there was the USS Mercy was brought into New York Harbor
Mm.
to provide extra beds. Every single one of those beds remained empty. Nightingale hospitals were set up in the UK, remained largely empty. And this was supposed to be during one of the primary peaks of COVID-19. And now that these injections have been rolled out, um, I think a lot of people are driven by fear that all kinds of fear, one of them being that the uninjected are the ones getting sick and filling up hospital beds, which is not the truth. I mean, look at the people who are coming down with Omicron, by and large, fully vaccinated.
And it's
And
mild. It's there's like a 70 or 80% less chance
right.
that you'll be hospitalized.
And
So your hospital beds argument is ridiculous.
right.
Sorry.
And there's also the false assumption, which flies in the face of so much, that the injections work. They clearly do not work. They
Mm.
don't prevent transmission. They don't prevent
Prevent illness.
contracting. Um, you can spread the same viral load as somebody who has not been injected. And then there's this flawed way of looking at them at vaccination in general, as in you get vaccinated to protect other people. No, vaccinations are solely to protect you.
Yeah.
They're not about
It's a
protecting other
prophylactic, fam.
people. They've never been about protecting other people. But the
Mm-mm.
argument's been so skewed by
The narrative. There's narrative control. There's a
right
perfect example.
by by Fauci, by Collins, by the whole coterie of them, and the fear and confusion is on purpose. It's not supposed to make sense because uh, mass psychosis is part of this. Mass psychosis drives the fear and drives people to do things that they otherwise wouldn't do, like harm themselves with these injections because they think they're doing the right thing,
Mm-hmm.
and or they don't know and they'd rather be on the safe side. And you can't fault people for that. That's not their fault. The fault lies with those driving the agenda. And Fauci, Collins, Bill Gates, Klaus Schwab, these are just the public faces of the agenda. They're not driving it in any substantial way, other than really being mouthpieces, other than being really like PR individuals. There are people above them who are giving directives as to what to say and what to do. And a lot of those people can be named. Um, Look at the Bank of International Settlements in Switzerland, people like Augustin Carson's, people at the helm of this massive financial restructuring that's taking place under the blanket of COVID-19.
Which you can't deny is happening. I don't want to hear anybody say that that's conspiratorial. Look at the CARES Act. What do you think that is? That's exactly what's going down, you guys. There is a monumental restructuring of not just like our economic systems, society in general, because all of this is going to impact all of us on a incredibly deep level.
Yeah,
It already is.
it's societal engineering, and
Mhm.
we have to have our antennae up for all sorts of things. And um, be willing to carefully speculate about the motives with everything, whether it's the
Yeah.
release of these emails, whether it's the narrative we're being fed about Russia and Ukraine, um, and on and on. And
My
that's the
starting position is that they're lying.
right.
That's where I always go. They're lying. Now let's figure out how, why, when. You know what I mean? But I always start from their lying because they are almost always lying. They may throw in kernels of truth to give things some legitimacy when it needs to, where there needs to be. But for the most part, they're lying. And even when they're telling you the truth, they're telling you the truth so that as to better manipulate you. Do you know what I mean? They're really, and I know that sounds like really dark and crazy and conspiratorial. That's real life. That's not, I mean, we have a ton of historical context for
Mhm.
this is how they operate. This is exactly what they do. The exact same playbook. They're just getting better at it. And they're figuring out, ways to move faster, to make larger power grabs at once. So it's really, we're just escalating. And you don't have to call me an accelerationist. I'm not accelerating. I'm responding to the acceleration.
Mhm.
That's where it is. I get called an accelerationist a lot, and that's not it. I'm just responding to the fact that they're accelerating at an incredibly rapid pace,
Right.
and we're really far behind.
Yeah, and we should remember too, from the last episode, when we talked about the Theranos case, what Alex Craner, who's been doing some very good coverage of it, said in his 6 lessons to be learned from the case is that these people driving the agenda, the public-facing ones and the non-public facing ones, they aren't as smart as
They can be stopped.
the mystique around them makes them out to be. Right. They're quite dumb and quite detached from
And they're
reality when it comes
acting
to it.
from a place of fear, and they're acting from a place, and they're the great thing that we have going in our favor is they're acting from a place of extreme arrogance.
Mhm.
They believe their own hype. You know what I mean? They believe their own hype. So that makes them weak, and they can be stopped. I mean, I mean, we talk about this all the time. We don't, it doesn't have to be this way, you guys. It
Right.
really does not have to be this way. There are way more of us than there are of them. And if we would just stop letting them divide us, and come together and focus on the real problem, which is this system that they've designed that's essentially designed to kill us all. If we could come together and deal with that, we could. I mean, they're not immortal. They could be
Right.
stopped.
Right.
They could absolutely be stopped.
Absolutely.
We just have to, see through the narrative control, which is what they use to control us. I mean, we're all, and the problem is that it's so very effective, and I just don't know if we're ever going to be able to get enough people to see through it at the same time.
And they need resources, particularly natural resources, to implement their agenda, which is why geopolitics remains an important part of this, even though it's a supra, as in outside nation state agenda they're trying to push. Geopolitics remains important, and that's why I bring up what's happening with Russia and Ukraine, for example, because if there were a U.S. NATO war against Russia, and Russia were somehow, if not defeated, then severely limited in its international influence, then that opens the door for U.S. and other NATO allies to reinsert themselves into Afghanistan. Not that they've totally left, but reinsert themselves there, take control of essential natural resources, especially metals that are needed for, like, lithium, for example,
Mhm.
um, to implement this green future they want to impose on all of us. Lithium is needed for solar panels. Lithium's needed for uh, cell phone batteries, although that is not really in line with their green agenda, but they still very much
Green.
they still very much rely on natural resources and control of those natural resources to foist their agenda upon us, including oil. I mean, look how much of so-called modern medicine is petroleum based, and they still need that. And that's where geopolitics comes into play in all of this, and why it's so important that we don't lose sight of what's happening on the foreign policy stage,
On
as
a
it were.
global stage, yeah, because I think a lot of people in this country specifically are very um prone to focus solely on domestic issues. They don't look at the bigger picture. They don't and we honestly, we need global solidarity against empire.
Right,
Period. Like it has to be global. I mean, we really are all fighting the same, like we have a common enemy, and it is empire.
right.
Whatever face that empire takes, that's what we're up against, is, the consolidation of power. So we really do need to take a more global view. I don't mean like, um, I don't intend for like the West to start entering into other countries and dictating how they. That's not what I mean at all. Quite the opposite. I mean that we all need to come together and fight back against that kind of, power and authority.
Yeah, and that may mean building localized parallel societies to what
Mm-hmm.
they have in mind, which is one global society, which is not really a society at all. It's us enslaved while they make decisions for us. We're completely beholden to them. Just like the World Economic Forum's now deleted document. It's 2030, you own nothing, and you're
You
happy.
will eat bugs and you'll like it.
Yeah, right. Uh, Klaus Schwab and
Fuck Klaus Schwab.
the cuts which we have now is too strong in
Seriously,
order
y'all,
not to
just
leave
if you
traces.
haven't, which I'm sure a lot of our audience has, but if you haven't, go watch you some videos of Klaus Schwab. He's creepy beyond measure. He is creepy. Like, he's a creepy dude. They're all creepy. They're all, in my personal opinion, they're all psychopaths. And we've allowed the worst amongst us to reach positions of power, and we need to do something about that
Yeah,
soon.
and as Derek Bros has pointed out in some really great work he's done recently, uh, the World Economic Forum is partnering with the UAE to roll out their new iteration of the Great Reset, which is now the Great Narrative. And the
Mm.
UAE is a party to the genocide that is being carried out in Yemen. So, are
Which
these?
again, we just bombed. Well, we helped provide the weaponry to bomb Yemen again. Again. Here we
Yeah.
go again.
And I recommend anybody who wants more to read more on that to go to thelastamericanvagabond.com and look at Derek Brose's recent work. He's done some really, really good investigations into that and points out, just takes the mask off of all of it. So
Hmm.
do go there if you can. So moving on quickly to
Yeah, we got to wrap pretty soon.
closing time, I just want to get to, let's
And
see.
just briefly, because I'm over it, Mr. Denis, I'm honestly, you're boring me. So, I mean, listen, I appreciate you coming to the show and the engagement on the shows, but it's like you ruined it. You're boring now. You're not, it was funny for a while, but you're just kind of annoying at this point. So I'm not gonna like continue to respond to you. And people in the chat, just ignore them. Like just
It's
they just want
It's
attention.
Christmas Eve. Go be with your family and friends.
Yeah, do something productive with your life, fam. Really.
I hope that was a pleasant enough response.
Well, there's also been other trolls, and somebody said something about, I think it was Shadowban Refugee said, so we're not making fun of that person. No, I'm not making fun of that person anymore, because that person genuinely needs help, and I'm not going to feed into that anymore. So just ignore. That's my advice to you. I mean, I'm not telling you what to do. You do whatever you want. I'm going to choose to ignore.
So moving on here
You
as
too,
we
John. Ignoring you too. You're
get
funny though, because you
to.
think I got like $2 million from Kyle Kalinske. Oh, my trolls are so dumb. Okay, anyway, what do you want to
Oh
go through
yes.
now?
Speaking of that, when are you sending me my next check?
Oh, yeah, I know. Oh, speaking of money though, we did get 2 tips, you guys. We did. So we should give
Oh,
those people a shout out. Look, see, this is
absolutely.
our bazillions of dollars. So Anna gave us a tip and said, Merry Xmas fams, love you. Love you too, girl. Oh, and free Sanj now. Yes, please. And then Nautilus tipped us and said, you guys are like the modern equivalent of Socrates students, only it's Julian who is on trial. So
Good
thanks,
point.
Nautilus.
Yeah,
Thanks, Anna.
thank you,
We
Anna and
appreciate
Nautilus.
you. Yeah. Thanks, guys. Yeah, I won't censor them. If they want, listen, Lucky, if they want to come hang out in the chat and engage, that helps us with the algorithm. So you're always welcome here. I'm just probably going to ignore you.
Yeah.
Merry
Hey,
Christmas.
come one, come all.
Yeah.
So moving on here, just to wrap up, I wanted to look at two COVID related things. The first is the RT piece, which talks about menstrual changes post COVID injection. So if you can pull that
Whoop,
up real
wrong
quick.
button. Hold on. I hit invite instead of share. Mm-hmm. Okay. What do we got?
So you can see the headline: COVID vaccines cause menstrual changes study. This was published yesterday on RT. Young women are experiencing changes in their periods, including heavier bleeding after receiving both first and second coronavirus shots. A study by the Norwegian Institute of Public Health, NIPH, suggests. So
This is something we've been hearing about for a while. This has been a problem that many people have talked about. You know, I remember months ago it was going around on Twitter. There was a lot of conversations happening around this. So this is just another study that reiterates that point.
right. So I won't read through the whole thing, but I will read this
I'll
one.
drop it in the chat for everybody.
It's the second paragraph. And so the cohort here they're looking at is women aged between 18 and 30. And the second paragraph says, while some 7.6% of participants experienced heavier bleeding before vaccination, the number of women reporting heavier periods after the first dose increased to 13.6%. And after the second dose, it further grew to 15.3%. So pretty substantial changes there. But can you click on that link to the study?
I don't know if it'll probably just keep sharing RT, so I'll have to stop and then.
If you click on the link in the RT piece, will it? Okay,
No,
yeah.
I just said I had to stop sharing because it wasn't
Okay.
sharing the RT screen.
So this isn't so much a study itself as it is a summary. But if you go down, it reiterates what the RT piece does. It gets a little more granular with the results, but essentially not much more than the RT piece. And if you keep going down a bit, so let's go up just a tiny bit. So the first thing to call out here is data about the duration of menstrual disturbances after dose 2 are not yet available, but we continue to monitor this. So in line with what I was saying earlier about Pfizer's own admission that there is no long-term or medium-term data on how this affects the reproductive systems of women. And what really galled me about this is that instead of raising an alarm, it seems like the researchers are trying to explain this away. So even while trying to admit that there's a problem. So you see this quote right here from Trogstad, who might be the lead researcher in this. Quote, most menstrual changes after the first dose were transient. On average, they return to their normal levels by the time of vaccination with the second dose, approximately 2 to 3 months after the first dose. So a few problems there. I don't know what the dosing schedule is for the subjects involved in this trial, but usually the second dose is 2 to 3 weeks rather than months after the first dose. So that raises questions there. But also, sort of poo-pooing the menstrual changes as transient, and then saying that, well, they return to normal within 2 to 3 months. That's not normal. That's problematic, and that should raise red flags. But it gets worse, because if you go down to advice for vaccination after menstrual changes, I'll read through this. The Norwegian Institute of Public Health gives the following advice to women who have experienced menstrual changes after coronavirus vaccination. Women with persistent menstrual changes should consult their doctor to rule out other diseases that may require treatment. With temporary menstrual changes in a regular cycle, the next vaccine dose can be given as planned. With heavy and persistent bleeding after an earlier dose, it is recommended to delay vaccination until the cause is investigated or the symptoms have passed. For menstrual changes after vaccination that require treatment, the next vaccine dose should be considered on an individual basis in consultation with a doctor. In cases where women have menstrual changes with another cause than vaccination, they can be given the vaccine against COVID-19. If you are in any doubt, consult your doctor, advises Trogstad. She emphasizes that these changes are temporary side effects for the majority and should not prevent women saying yes to a coronavirus vaccine. Quote, and here we go again, vaccination gives protection to the individual against a severe COVID-19 course, as well as contributing to reduced transmission in society, unquote, she emphasizes. So there's the lie again. And I don't have a link to it, but I'm going to pull it up from my Twitter, and I'm going to drop the link in the private chat. So Misty, hopefully you can pull it up. But this same institute, I went to their site and had a look around and found some very disturbing medical advice being given. And this is one particular example I'd like to share. So if you can just pull that up. So this is on their site. This is a downloadable poster which says pregnant women should have 2 COVID-19 vaccine doses. And for those who are just listening, there's an illustration of a woman inside a bubble, which sort of looks like a, I guess you could say, I don't know, uterus maybe. I don't know what that's supposed to be, but she's inside of a bubble, and then underneath that it says COVID-19 can cause a severe disease course among pregnant women. Pregnant women should protect themselves and their unborn child with 2 doses of coronavirus vaccine. Coronavirus vaccination does not harm the pregnant woman or the unborn child. Again, there is no data to back that up. Pregnant women who are fully vaccinated before pregnancy do not need to be vaccinated again. Talk to your midwife, doctor, or check your municipality's website for information about where to get free coronavirus vaccine. And I said, there's a name for this, eugenics. And that is exactly what that is. In the absence of any data about the safety of how these injections affect pregnant women, here you have this national Norwegian Institute of Public Health advising pregnant women to get both injections, which I just find utterly disgusting. And, they should be held to task for that. That's criminal to my mind. So just pointing that out there, in addition to that RT piece. And then just to wrap here, I don't know if this is something to celebrate or be afraid of. I'd say the latter. But if you bring up that NBC News piece, the FDA has authorized the first COVID pill from Pfizer for emergency use. Initial supply of the antiviral drug, the first oral treatment for COVID-19 in the US will be limited. So Pfizer just rolled this out yesterday, or perhaps 2 days ago. It has emergency use authorization in the US. Just like the injections they're still giving, Comirnaty, the so-called authorized one, is still not available in the US. So it's an oral drug, as I mentioned. It's called Paxlovid, which sounds like a combination between Paxil and COVID, which is very bizarre. Will be prescribed for use in adults and children ages 12 and up with mild to moderate COVID who are at risk for severe disease or hospitalization, the FDA said in a statement. So, of course, it's being touted by all the usual sources. Pfizer CEO Albert Bourla said in a statement Wednesday that the company is ready to begin delivery of the drug to the U.S., quote, immediately. And then he goes on to say this breakthrough therapy, which has been shown to significantly reduce hospitalizations and deaths, can be taken at home, will change the way we treat COVID-19, and hopefully help reduce some of the significant pressures facing our healthcare and hospital systems, he said. So the same old line there. So also of note, the FDA did not seek the advice of its independent advisory panel called the Antimicrobial Drugs Advisory Committee when it reviewed data on Pfizer's pill. So again, no real sound vetting of the safety or efficacy.
And another emergency use authorization. No, thank
Yep.
you. No, thank you.
Yep.
We need to, like, this emergency powers thing that we're giving away so freely. We need to stop that. That is an extraordinary amount of power to be giving, any one person or group of people.
Right. And not least because it completely removes any liability for these pharmaceutical companies for any damages.
And they don't have to release any information for 75 years, 76 years, whatever it is.
Yeah, it's up to 75 now. So I recommend reading through this NBC piece because there are just so many contradictions that jump out. One of them, and questions as well. One of them being, why is it going to be limited? I doubt that has to do with any sort of safety because, as we've seen, these companies really don't care about public safety.
I dropped it in the chat for everybody. If everybody wants to go check it out, you can definitely. I would recommend going and checking out all of this stuff. Honestly, this is stuff we really need to be paying super close attention to, because this is just the next step in their whole plan. So definitely go check out that piece for sure.
Yeah, and I'll just wrap by saying they say that the pills take time to manufacture, so that's why they will be limited. Although these companies seem to have no problem manufacturing injections in mass, so something to question there. And then the last point, and this is what the article ends on. The administration, meaning the Biden administration, also plans to meet with Pfizer to discuss how it can help improve the company's manufacturing capacity, he said. That right there is the definition of fascism. That is that is the merging of state and corporate power right there. Why is our government meeting with Pfizer to help it improve its manufacturing capacity? Everybody should be asking that question. That makes
why is Pfizer sponsoring our news outlets?
Outside the context of fascism, that makes no sense. So
we're in very dangerous times, basically, is what we're trying to say here.
So this is obviously being touted as a miracle pill. I think we should at least be very skeptical of that and consider it anything but for the time being. Of course, it still remains to be seen what's going to happen with this going forward. And we will definitely keep tabs on this and see where this goes. Merck is also still in the running with its own version of this. And again, this is more covering up of the fact that there already exists very safe and effective treatments for COVID-19, but because the EUA is in use, those are not allowed to be prescribed. A lot of very bold and brave doctors are ignoring that, using hydroxychloroquine, ivermectin, vitamin D, vitamin C, zinc, quercetin, etc. But the medical industrial complex churns on. They want us to keep using their synthesized remedies, and this is one more iteration of that. But we will be paying attention to this,
Yeah.
and we will wrap it there for today.
Yes. Thanks everybody in the chat for hanging out with us. We appreciate you. I hope if you celebrate Christmas, hope you have a great Christmas. If you don't, I hope you just have a great day. Yeah. So
Are
thanks
we on next week on New Year's Eve, or
I
what
don't
are we
see why
gonna do?
not. I don't
Okay.
have any issue doing it. Yeah, so we'll be back next week at 4. Same time, same place, same bat channel.
Sounds
And yeah,
good.
if you guys can, don't forget to light your candles. Take a picture, post it on Twitter, hashtag candles for Assange, tag the Department of Justice and whoever, all kinds of people. Make some noise about it if you can. That would be very much appreciated. So thanks again to everybody for hanging out, and we'll see you next week.
Peace.
Bye guys.